World Chess Championships, and neither player
behind the pawns, backing the pawns.
Anand feeling the heat, needing a big-time move, and suddenly he had dropped his knight back, and there was heavy pressure on Kasparov's pawn. The knight dropping back to attack it, and unexpectedly, Anand had found a way to pressure Kasparov.
Now, if you look, the knight is attacking the pawn on d5, and the pawn, and the white queen. So there was too much pressure, and he's won that center pawn. That is a crucial pawn for Anand to win. But Kasparov's still okay here. He can take the bishop on b6, so there are going to be mass exchanges in this position, and it's beginning to balance out. It's looking very even.
And in fact, after capturing the knight on d5, Kasparov offered a draw, and Anand accepted.
Vishy Anand was under some pressure in this game, but he found a couple of accurate moves and managed to equalize. Today, wondering whether the deadlock between the world champion Kasparov and the challenger Anand from India is going to be broken today.
Well, game 6. Kasparov with the white pieces, Anand with the black pieces. And the question was Kasparov going to continue with the random openings he had been playing?
No monkey business today. He's played his pawn out to e4. This signals he really wants to test Anand.
This move he had used to defeat the challenger earlier in the year in a tournament in Riga, and Anand continuing that exact same setup by playing e5, Kasparov continuing also with knight to f3.
So now White's bishop coming out to b5, the so-called Spanish opening. Very difficult test for Anand.
And Anand, having played this several times earlier in the year versus USA's best Gatakomsky, and obviously Kasparov had something waiting for him, and we jump ahead now to move 12, and Kasparov sitting, considering his move.
And it was here that he unleashed some really frightening opening preparation. You can see him just smiling there. Black's pawn has moved up, opening up the line of White's bishop towards the black bishop there. Chaos breaking out in the center.
And knight to g5, a spectacular move from Kasparov, allowing his knight to be taken.
This has actually been played before. The knight's taken, the white queen comes out, hitting the black knight on c6 would be very dangerous for black indeed. So instead, Anand captures that pawn on c3.
And Kasparov capturing the bishop on e6, Anand quickly recapturing, and now Kasparov taking that pawn on c3.
Well, in fact, this has all been seen before in an old game, Karpov against Korchnoi from a previous World Championship match. Black's queen coming down to the center of the board. Such a powerful piece. Now Kasparov offering an exchange of queens.
And Anand ignoring it and castling, leaving his king on a weird side of the board because it's so unprotected. But Anand looking very calm. He had prepared this particular new move for Kasparov.
Queen sidestepping to e1. Very important because now White is trying to attack Black's king, which is slightly exposed. Look at Black's pawns. They're already advanced, making Black's king rather weak.
And now Anand exchanging off that bishop on b3, Kasparov capturing back, and now an open file was ready for his rook, the king jumping up to b7 to protect itself.
So Kasparov has some attacking chances against Black's king, but Anand holding steady for the moment.
Kasparov very cool now, sensing the moment, sensing the kill. Kasparov known for his tremendous attacking ability.
And he shows it here because now he played such a tricky move. He played his bishop up, offering an exchange. There we go. The bishop can exchange itself off for the black bishop, and after that exchange, Black's king will be very exposed indeed.
And Kasparov returning to the room from his dressing room backstage where he had been considering the board, and now Anand forcing the exchange with the last move, h6, and now Kasparov quickly exchanging off the bishops, and now the knight had to leave from the sector of the king.
Now you can see those squares around the king looking very weak, and that knight threatening to hop in, taking a pawn, and White's queen could swing over, starting a deadly attack. So Anand was forced to exchange off that knight in the center for his rook.
And now Anand down material, down a rook for a knight, played an incredible move. Queen takes pawn on b3, opening up lines on that side of the board, and Kasparov, stunned, couldn't believe that Anand had played this move, rocking back in his chair thinking, what kind of move is this? And Kasparov needed to be very careful. The pawns on that side, very weak, but potentially could be dangerous.
So if the queens are exchanged, then surely Black would have some good play here, but in the meantime, there's going to be a great attack.
But then Kasparov offered an exchange of queens, a stunning move considering that everyone thought he was going to actually go after the black king.
But now we can see that he's developed this strong pawn chain in the center of the board. If he can push those forward and get his rook down to hassle the pawns, then he might have a very strong position.
Anand now fighting for his life, trying to bring his king up on the left side of the board, while Kasparov was bringing his king in the middle. But you can see Anand's pawns there trying to race down, trying to score a touchdown. Those pawns were critical for Anand, but suddenly a rook burst in on the 7th rank, and Anand was under heavy pressure.
Yeah, I mean, at this moment, it looked as though he was in trouble. White's rook is going to just cream off those pawns. You can see the rook there. It can just take the pawn whenever it wants, but he's got to watch out for the black pawns advancing down the board.
And Anand making his way down the board with those pawns, and a third pawn joined the action.
The center is just exploding here. You can see White attacking the black knight. White's pawn on d4 also hit. This could go any way.
And the players stunned everybody by agreeing to a draw.
What a timid way to finish just when the game was coming to its climax.
And with the score tied at 3-3, Anand commented on the unexpected finish.
Well, we both basically agreed with each other. We didn't have a clue what was going on. So. Basically.
Well, we were pretty confused too, but we thought we'd try and play on this position, just play it out to see what might happen.
And Anand later felt that he was actually worse in the final position.
And Kasparov was regretting that he'd offered the draw. He felt he might have had good winning chances. Well, in our game, it was still that black a-pawn steaming down the board that's the big problem for White. But in the end, White managed to deliver a perpetual check just by checking with the rook there against the king, and even our game ended up in a draw.
Garry Kasparov looking at a chess set made out of chocolate, probably wishing that Anand's pieces were as easy to eat. And we'll be back with Game 7.
And seconds have been working for the last couple of games to cook up some big improvement.
The last time he played a passive queen to e2, but this time he plunged ahead with e5.
Well, this is such a double-edged idea, because if it goes wrong, he could be left with a very poor pawn structure, but Kasparov must play so carefully he could lose at any moment with a bishop sacrifice to the king.
Well, all that preparation time spent trying to figure out how to blast through Kasparov's defenses. That advanced a tremendous one, and this bishop line opened up towards that king. It was a heated position right from the word go.
Very dangerous, because once White recaptures with the pawn, there we go, it forces the knight attack there, it forces the knight away from defending Black's king. So this is very dangerous indeed for Kasparov.
And the knight jumping to the middle of the board, and now Black's queen out of the action, and White exchanging knights. Knight takes d5.
Yeah, because the black queen is trapped on the other side of the board, it means that the king is potentially in a lot of danger.
Well, Anand now looking at this position, and incredibly, he spent a lot of time considering the position on the board.
Black has this weak pawn in the center, but it's very difficult for White to attack. Also, the bishop has more freedom now, that black bishop. And the rook coming across to defend the pawn in the center of the board. Now, this last pawn move, h6 from Kasparov's, a brilliant move, defending that weak square on g5 and preventing any kind of attack from Anand.
Well, now Anand played c3, attacking the knight, and the knight captured the bishop, and the white queen was forced to recapture the knight, but it didn't seem as if this preparation had worked out for Anand, and Kasparov now feeling very safe, taking a look at the position, seeing how he could get a big advantage.
Well, this was very clever defense from Kasparov indeed. There's this pawn in the center of the board that Anand's attacking. Instead of defending it passively, Kasparov counterattacks. He's allowing that pawn to be captured, but he's swapping off Anand's dangerous bishop on b6.
And Anand took the pawn, but Kasparov quickly moving his bishop to attack the white queen, forcing it to beat a retreat.
So the queen moves back, and Kasparov a pawn down, but he should be able to get it back.
Exchanging bishops, and now the pawn on b6 was under attack.
And it's very difficult indeed for Anand to defend that, so instead he just gave it back, brought his rook up at the side of the board. He's preparing to move it into the center. Very balanced position.
And the players agreed to a draw, and very friendly after the game, chatting about it like old friends.
Yeah, there's none of the animosity that we've seen in previous World Championship matches.
So the score was deadlocked at 3.5, and at the post-game press conference, Kasparov seemed content with the white pieces, Viswanathan Anand with the black pieces, and with 7 draws in a row, it seemed like this game was going to be extremely tense.
And what a crocodile smile from Kasparov. You can bet he's got something really strong prepared.
Well, he began again with Bobby Fischer's old favorite move, pawn to e4, and this really showed that he had aggressive intentions.
In the first few games with White, Kasparov played knight f3, he played pawn to d4, and only tried to get a very slight advantage. But in this game, in the previous game where he played White, he's played pawn to e4, and he showed that he really had some very interesting preparation ready.
And Kasparov using the Scotch opening, he had used this before in prior World Championship matches.
Well, this gives White very open piece play. You notice that the bishops are free to move out. Now, Black just attacking that center pawn.
And Kasparov exchanging knights on c6, Anand recapturing with b takes c6, and Kasparov surging ahead with the pawn to e5, attacking the knight on f6.
Now, Anand counters by moving his queen out. The pawn can't take the knight because of the pin to the king. So Kasparov just blocking that with the queen.
And Anand jumping his knight to the center of the board, but Kasparov continuing the attack with his pawn, and now just leaving the room, leaving Anand to consider the position.
Anand's knight in the center of the board is attacked, and he has to decide how does he deal with this. There we go, Black's knight attacked by the pawn. But he moves his bishop out. Now if the pawn captures the knight, the bishop comes down and attacks the queen.
And Anand played a spectacular move, pawn to g5, and Kasparov, now stunned by this new move, needing to get his bearings, was an aggressive foray by Anand trying to attack on that left side of the board.
Now, Anand is showing here that he's so well prepared. That pawn on g5, that's the new move, covering some important central squares. Kasparov responding by moving the bishop out, attacking the queen.
And Anand blocking with his pawn, and the center was under heavy pressure at the moment, pandemonium on the chessboard.
Well, the position has just exploded here. The pawn attacking the queen. Now, Anand must exchange queens. There we go. He's captured the queen. Kasparov recaptures, so we now have an end game. The queens have been exchanged.
And with his knight under attack in the middle of the board, Anand coolly ignored it and played bishop to g7, an unbelievable move, attacking the rook, and Anand very calm with this move. Kasparov wondering what the heck was going on, as Anand was trying to bury him right away.
And we can see the black bishop there cutting across the board to the rook, but Kasparov first captures the knight in the center of the board.
And Anand needing to exchange bishops on e2, Kasparov quick to capture the bishop back, and then Anand's turn now, beating in on that rook in the corner, and that rook was history.
But there's so much going on in this position. The rook coming across, and look at the white pawns in the center of the board looking really threatening, and Anand has a big problem here.
Anand feeling the heat now as the game seemed to have turned, but suddenly Anand played an absolutely unbelievable move, castling with his king into the line of the white rook. Now the white rook pressuring the pawn in front of his king.
Well, that's an extraordinary decision from Anand. It's meant that he can bring his other rook into the center of the board, but look at the white pawns. They look so threatening.
And Kasparov now feeling as if he could attack, looking for some possibilities. He had sensed something going on, and it looked as if he had an aggressive position, but he needed to bring his knight into the action.
Well, Anand felt that this knight was going to be too dangerous, so he simply exchanged it off. And now we have a situation where White has a rook and a bishop against Anand's two rooks.
And now the rook leaping up, attacking the weak pawn on d5, and Kasparov quickly defending it. And now Anand had to make a big decision. Was he going to go on the attack, or was he going to try to repeat moves and maybe get just a draw?
Well, the two rooks normally should be stronger than the rook and the bishop, but it's those white pawns in the center of the board that are really threatening, and it's not easy for Black to make progress here.
And White's king attacking the black rook, and Anand deciding to just repeat moves in a very tense position.
So the rook attacking the pawn in the center of the board, and the white king must move back to defend that. Now, if Black wants to play for a win, then the rook must come down to attack the pawn, but White can defend against this very easily by moving the bishop in to defend. So instead, Anand just repeating the position.
And Kasparov returning to the board, and this repetition of moves was an obvious offer of a draw. Both sides seemed pleased with the result.
And the crowd was happy too. They felt that this was one of the first games where both players were really going for the win.
Well, after their 8th draw in a row, the score is knotted at 4-4. Later, we asked Anand if he was intimidated by Kasparov's legendary board presence.
Already after 8 games, you just get used to this presence. I mean, most times at tournaments, you have the guy once, during the entire event. And maybe that explains that feeling. But after 8 games, it just feels like my opponent.
And here's Kasparov relaxing, chatting with us and the crowd. And we'll be back to wrap up week 2. To some post-game analysis by challenger Vishy Anand, who was showing just why the last game was indeed a draw. And despite aggressive assaults from both sides, the players still managed to play to a record-breaking 8 consecutive draws to begin a World Championship match. So an exciting second week of action, but Danny, when is somebody going to land the first killer punch?
Well, I'm mystified. Normally, Kasparov is devastating with the white pieces, but Anand is proving to be a brilliant defender.
But in the very unlikely event of 20 consecutive draws, Kasparov would keep his title. Anand's got to be feeling the pressure. He's got to win some games.
Yeah, I'm sure Anand's going to go for it next week. But remember, the pressure's on Kasparov as well, because he doesn't want to retain his title just by making 20 straight draws. So next week, we're going to see some fireworks.
So for Danny King, I'm Maurice Ashley saying so long from the World Trade Center in New York City. Special thanks to the United States Chess Federation.